Headquarters, I'm Arthel Neville.
Hello, Arthel.
Hi, Eric.
And hello, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. Protests broke out in several major cities across the country yesterday, all in response to the very controversial executive order that bars citizens from 7 mostly Muslim nations from entering our country, including, at first, green card holders. They are legal residents of the United States.
And Eric, right now at JFK, where as many as 12 people are still being detained, we have a live press conference happening. New York Congressman Hakeem Jeffries there holding that press conference at JFK, and we're expecting to hear from a volunteer attorney for some of those being detained. We are monitoring that situation. We'll bring you those developments as we get them. And meanwhile, President Trump defending the action, tweeting this morning, quote, "Our country needs strong borders and extreme vetting now. Look what is happening all over Europe and indeed the world, a horrible mess." But many say the president's order created chaos and confusion. We have Team Fox coverage. Kristen Fisher has reaction at the White House. Garrett Tenney on what lawmakers are saying. But we begin with Will Carr. He's live in Los Angeles at the airport there. Will?
Hey there, Arthel. You summed it up well. Confusion is exactly what's going on. We know that yesterday here at LAX, 7 people were detained. Their status right now is unknown. We've reached out to federal authorities trying to figure out exactly where they are, if they've been sent back, if they are still here at LAX, or if they've been released after the federal judge's order. At this point, we just don't know. We do know about 300 people showed up spontaneously last night here at LAX after the 7 were detained. Up in Seattle at the airport, thousands of people showed up spontaneously protesting there. They stopped the light rail service for a bit there. They're expected to protest again today. And then at the San Francisco International Airport, 1,000 people showed up to protest there last night. One woman, her father was coming in from Iran. She simply didn't know what happened to him. Take a listen to what she said.
We've been pretty anxious and frustrated, but right now we just heard that they are letting some people out, so it's kind of like right at this moment I'm pretty happy and just hoping that he's going to come out any minute.
That woman and so many other families waited nervously, and then a short time after the federal judge's order, her father was released, and they were reunited in San Francisco. Now, here in Los Angeles, they're expecting several protests throughout the course of the day, and I can tell you it's a safe bet that if you had several hundred and several thousand at other airports up and down the West Coast, that these protests today could be even larger because they've been planning them. And along with that, there's the question of security. If you can see behind me, there's hundreds and thousands of people here at LAX planning their travel for the day. And with that, you're going to have a number of protesters coming in the next hour, hour and a half here. The mayor has asked them to remain calm, to be peaceful, and we're going to see exactly how that plays out throughout the course of the day. Arthel.
Will Carr there live at LAX. Thanks, Will.
Well, Arthel, congressional lawmakers are blasting the president's orders, while others are supporting it this morning. Democratic Minority Leader, New York's Democratic Senator Charles Schumer, there on the left, you can see he's holding a news conference right now alongside an Iraqi man who was detained at John F. Kennedy International Airport. He served in the U.S. Army for 10 years along with his family. Garrett Tenney, live in Washington with the latest. Garrett?
Yeah, Erica, we should point out that Senator Schumer just said in that press conference that he is going to introduce legislation with the goal of overturning this executive order. This was all over the Sunday shows today, though, and the Trump team continues to make the argument that this is nothing more than a temporary ban to ensure that we secure our borders from any potential radical Islamic terrorist. On ABC's This Week, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also defended the president's actions and, like the White House, argued this executive order does not target Muslims.
To the extent that they're trying to improve the vetting process, I think that's in order. We need to bear in mind that we don't have religious tests in this country, and we also need to remember that some of our best allies in the war against Islamic terrorism are Muslims.
Not all Republicans are on board with the president's executive order, though. Last night, Michigan Congressman Justin Amash sent out a series of tweets criticizing the move, writing in part, "It's not lawful to ban immigrants on the basis of nationality. If the president wants to change immigration law, he must work with Congress." He continued, We must do much more to properly vet refugees, but a blanket ban represents an extreme approach not consistent with our nation's values. That's the same criticism coming from a lot of Democrats, including Senate Minority Whip Dick Durbin, who appeared on Fox News Sunday.
I think this is one that is going to haunt us for a long time, was the suggestion by the president that somehow we're going to favor Christians and in some cases banning Muslims in the future. That is exactly the opposite message we need to send to our allies and to those who frankly want to do us harm around the world.
And we're also hearing from the leaders of a number of our European allies, including Germany, France, and the UK, who all say they are very concerned about this ban on refugees and immigration. Eric?
All right, Garrett, thanks so much. We know the controversy and the pushback over the refugee ban comes as the Trump administration prepares for another busy day at the White House, including more scheduled phone calls with foreign leaders. Kristen Fisher is live at the White House with much more. Kristen, first let's start with the president's reaction. What is he saying about the judge's ruling last night and the protests that continue over his executive order?
Well, President Trump is unapologetic. You saw the tweet that he sent out this morning that our country needs extreme vetting now. He then sent 3 of his top aides to defend that executive order on several Sunday shows. And their message was essentially, sorry, but safety first. Here's White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
The criticism that's coming is from someone who's gotten into office, hit the ground running, had a flurry of activity to do exactly what he said he was going to do, whether it was bringing back jobs, fighting for American taxpayers and cutting the cost and waste out of government programs, or doing what he said overseas and protecting this nation. But he is not going to apologize for putting the safety of this country first and foremost.
Now, so far, President Trump has not commented directly about all of the protests popping up at airports across the country, but that could change this afternoon. There was a protest plan set to start in about an hour for right outside the White House, or as close as these protesters can get, and 14,000 people on Facebook have already said that they're coming here. Eric?
Yeah, Kristen, more protest planned for this afternoon in New York and also in other cities. Meanwhile, the president will remain at the White House. What else is on the schedule today?
Well, today is actually the first day since President Trump took office that he has no public events on his calendar, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to be busy behind the scenes. In about 30 minutes, he's got a call scheduled with the King of Saudi Arabia, then the Crown Prince of the United Arab Emirates, and then the acting president of South Korea. And this comes, don't forget, just one day after speaking on the phone with 5 other world leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin. He also signed 3 more executive actions yesterday. And then looking ahead, the big news next week will be the announcement of his Supreme Court nominee, which he is set to announce on Thursday. Eric?
All right, Kristen, thanks so much. And in a few moments, we are going to look at the nations where the terrorists who have actually attacked us come from. Ambassador John Bolton will delve into that. He will talk about the controversy over this ban. Ambassador John Bolton in 5 minutes from now. Arthel?
And Eric, meanwhile, President Trump's cabinet starting to take shape as he enters week 2 of his presidency. The president's pick to head Veterans Affairs, Dr. David Shulkin, will go before the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee on Wednesday, and Shulkin is no stranger to the VA. Our next guest sits on the Veterans Affairs Committee, one of a handful of committees, in fact, Republican Senator Jerry Moran of Kansas. Senator Moran, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, good morning. Good to be with you.
Thank you. And as we said, Dr. Shulkin is certainly not new to the department. He served as Undersecretary of Health the past year and a half during tumultuous times. So how can Dr. Shulkin serve as the fixer if given control over the VA?
Well, Arthel, I think that's the question. I mean, what I want to be reassured from Dr. Shulkin, and we met earlier this week in my office, had a fine conversation, but I want to make certain that the VA is going to be led in a way different than what we've seen in the past. It's going to take significant, in my view, shakeup at the VA, because I think we've been lacking the necessary leadership to change the bureaucracy, the culture of the Department of Veterans Affairs. I've served on the Veterans Committee since I came to Congress. It's always had its challenges. It's a big bureaucracy that has lots of men and women to serve. But the reality is, in recent time, it seemed as if the drive, the motivation to get things right diminished. And I attribute that to just the bureaucratic nature, the higher level executives. Many times the VA does things well and does it right. I get compliments from Kansas veterans for the VA regularly, but way too many veterans are falling through the cracks. And there's been a lack of accountability and a lack of motivation or drive to make sure that no veteran doesn't receive the kind of care and treatment that he or she deserves by serving our country.
And Senator, you mentioned bureaucracy about 5 times there, just in a short period of time. So clearly the VA system is bleeding. If confirms, more specifically, what would you say are the critical wounds that would need Dr. Shulkin's immediate attention? And realistically, how quickly could he fix the problems? And then what injuries fall next in line?
You know, we've been through a couple of secretaries of Veterans Affairs during the Obama administration, and Dr. Shulkin has served in that administration for about 18 to 20 months. So he has some experience. And what I want to know is he going to be somebody who is a changer as compared to the status quo? The status quo is insufficient for me and for many veterans in Kansas and across the country. And he can convince me of that, although he needs to do it. And that hearing will be a way to accomplish that. I've also outlined a couple of things, what we call casework, issues with certain veterans in Kansas that I'd like to see if Dr. Shulkin can solve. So what he can do as a new secretary is, take care of people who do things wrong within the VA. Too often we see that if you make a mistake, if you are lackadaisical about your job, if you demonstrate lack of care and concern for veterans, you simply get transferred someplace else within the VA system. The VA desperately needs accountability, and it's been lacking for a long time. So that's a start. We also need to have the choice program. That's a law that was enacted by Congress a couple years ago, signed into law, and it says if you are a veteran that lives long distances from a VA or the VA can't provide the service in a timely fashion, the VA will allow you to see a hometown physician or be admitted to a hometown hospital. That's very important for states like Kansas, and it's very important for veterans who can't get the care in a timely fashion, and yet the VA has implemented that legislation very poorly, very slowly, and with just a bunch more bureaucracy. The solution to our problems at the VA, if you convince me that the VA, our veterans are needing more money at the VA to take care of their needs, I'm one that you could convince of that. But not at the moment. What we need is less
overhead, less
just bureaucracy and junk that comes the way. Okay, it's not about money. It's about doing the job right.
Right, less overhead in the form of, pardon me, department heads, et cetera. Pardon me, let's talk money, because as you're also on the Appropriations Committee, I want to talk about funding the wall. I mean, the current price tag is somewhere between $12 to $15 billion. And as you well know, when President George W. Bush signed the Secure Fence Act into law almost 10 years ago, 2006, a little more than 10 years ago, the estimated cost then was close to $5 billion, not $12 to $15 billion. So what do you think, Senator Moran, about U.S. taxpayers footing the bill up front? And are you confident that Mexico will reimburse the U.S.? And will those repayments come in a form that will, be effective and make us whole?
Well, I've certainly seen what the president has said. I think this is the time for Congress to have the necessary hearings. The appropriations process needs to work. It seems difficult to me to envision the circumstance in which Mexico actually pays for the wall, but I'd be delighted to hear how that could be accomplished. But I think Congress now needs to prioritize. The border is important. National security matters. Who comes across our borders is a law enforcement and national security issue, and Congress very well may be willing to prioritize this as spending, but we need to have the story in place that then convinces us that it will actually work. And it will mean that we will have to spend money less someplace else.
And that's going to be the key, and that's what we'll be looking forward to hearing what you and your fellow lawmakers come up with. Senator Moran, really appreciate your time with us here on Fox News this Sunday. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for caring about veterans.
Of course. Absolutely.
And speaking about our veterans, we have some breaking news on our nation's battle against international terrorism and the cost to some of our troops. It is a tragic reminder of the dangers and sacrifices our armed forces face on the front lines overseas. A U.S. service member, we're told, has been killed and 3 others wounded in a raid against al-Qaeda militants in Yemen. It was a raid that President Trump authorized himself. This is the first combat death to occur during his administration. Connor Powell is live in our Middle East bureau with more. Hi, Connor.
Yeah, Eric, for the last few years, the world's attention when it comes to Yemen has been on the focus of the brutal war between Saudi Arabia and the Houthi rebels there. But al-Qaeda has maintained a position in Yemen for a long time, and it's been the focus of U.S. counterterrorism operations. The U.S. military has maintained a small footprint in the area to battle al-Qaeda there. And over the weekend, according to the Pentagon, the U.S. led a raid there targeting al-Qaeda fighters in the southeastern part of Yemen. One U.S. service member was killed as part of this raid in the firefight with the militants. 3 others were also injured during this firefight with al-Qaeda. Now, we also understand that another service member was injured when one of the U.S. aircrafts crashed into an area nearby that raid. It's not clear if it was directly related to that raid or if it was something else that was going on, but it was in the same general area. Now, this raid marks the first time that a U.S. service member has died in combat under President Trump, who has vowed to wage a more aggressive military campaign against militants around the world. We also understand, Eric, that this operation, this raid, was planned sometime in advance, but it was approved by President Trump. But it was not something that was a spur-of-the-second type raid or a last minute. It has been in the works for some time, Eric.
All right, Connor, and it, of course, is a reminder of the threat that still exists. Thank you. Marthel?
Eric, and meanwhile, the Trump administration dealing with blowback over the president's travel ban. A live press conference underway right now at JFK Airport here in New York City, where we're now being told that at least 14 people are being detained. Brian Yennis is out there at the airport, and he's going to bring us the very latest coming up. Also, our panel weighs in on the new executive order and what it could mean for immigrants in this country.
More now on President Trump's executive order barring citizens from 7 mostly Muslim nations from legally entering the U.S. No, those 7 nations include Syria, Iraq, and Iran. But terrorists who have carried out attacks in our country have overwhelmingly come from other places. What's considered the first radical Islamic terrorist attack on our soil, the assassination of Jewish extremist Rabbi Meir Kahane in 1990 in Manhattan. Well, that was carried out by El Sayed Nosair. He was from Egypt, a nation not on the list. He was part of the New Jersey terrorist cell headed up by blind Sheikh Abdul Rahman that went on to bomb the World Trade Center in 1993. Rahman, also from Egypt. And, of course, the 9/11 hijackers from Saudi Arabia, a country not on the list. The attempted car bomb in Times Square in 2010 was the work of Fasil Shahzad. He was a U.S. citizen from Pakistan, also a nation not on the list. The New York subway bombing plot, Najibullah Zazi. He was a U.S. citizen. He was from Afghanistan, a nation not on the list. The Boston Marathon bombings, the Sanar brothers, of course, Dzhokhar and Tamerlan, well, they were U.S. citizens from Chechnya and Kyrgyzstan, 2 nations, Russia, not on the list. San Bernardino shooter, Syed Farouk, well, he on the left was born here. His wife there on the right, Tashim Malik, she was from Pakistan, a country not on the list. The Pulse nightclub killer in Orlando, Omar Mateen, born on Long Island, New York. The suspected Manhattan bomber last fall, who's accused of that, Ahmad Rahmani. He's a U.S. citizen born in Afghanistan, a nation also not on the list. And Tahir Edan, who went on a stabbing spree in St. Cloud, Minnesota at a mall last September. Well, he was of Somali descent, but born in Kenya, not on the list. Ambassador John Bolton joins us now, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Senior Fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and a Fox News contributor. Ambassador, do you think this order is a proper method to address the terrorist threat or a haphazard creation that just sown confusion and chaos?
Well, I think it's a step, just to start with the list of 7 countries. This list essentially comes from the Obama administration, which over time had put together a program to reduce the granting of visa waivers to people from those countries applying to come in. So this list of 7 countries is not haphazard. As I say, it comes from the Obama administration. The measure in the executive order obviously takes it a step further by putting a temporary moratorium on granting visas from these 7 countries. And I think the idea that it doesn't address the risks of terrorists coming in from other countries obviously is something that requires attention, because we don't want to be attacked no matter where the people come from. But to say, therefore, this executive order it should be rescinded, is to say, well, if you don't do everything all at once, you can't even address even a part of the problem. And I think that's clearly wrong.
Well, you know, Afghanistan, of course, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia are not included on the list. And the Washington Post is saying that is because the president has business ties to those nations. Why do you think those nations are left off?
You know, I assume that's completely silly. There should be stricter vetting of applicants from a lot of different places. The 7 countries in this executive order are simply, for a brief period of time, going to have a moratorium on granting any applications because of the nature of the chaos or similar circumstances in those countries, like Yemen, for example, which has no effective government, like Libya, like Syria. In the other places, there are governments. Now, that's not to say there shouldn't be very careful vetting of people coming from those countries as well.
What about the critics of this who say, you know, look, these refugees go through 18 months, 2-3 years worth of extreme vetting already. We basically know who they are. There's not a big number, and I see you shaking your head. You know, would you address that concern that they basically know who these people are?
Sure. If they're saying that the visa application process takes a long time, I have no doubt that that's correct. Government is not the world's most efficient creation when it comes to this sort of thing. But that doesn't mean for 18 months FBI agents, DEA agents, Secret Service agents, local police all over the world are studiously investigating each of these applications. It means that for long periods of time, their applications are sitting on somebody's desk. So I don't regard that as evidence of serious vetting. In fact, in this past year, the heads of intelligence and law enforcement agencies have testified several times before Congress that from a number of these countries in particular, we simply don't have adequate vetting. And I think part of this is, on the part of the protesters, is trying to make a political issue out of something that it's not. The fact is, just as you look at people coming in from illegal drug exporting countries differently than you do from someplace like Iceland, when you have countries that are the source of terrorism, you should look carefully at people who want to come into the United States from there. That's not a religious test, it's a terrorism test.
And finally, quickly, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think it's going to go on. Look, the court orders, as I read them, are really very limited in scope. I think arguments that could have been made in defense of the executive order don't seem to have been made. There's a lot still to come here, and I have no doubt this executive order will be modified, expanded in some respects, perhaps reduced in some others.
All right, Ambassador. Thank you for your insight and analysis, as always. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Of course. Arthel.
Well, Eric, meanwhile, President Trump's temporary immigration ban sparking detentions and protests across the country. The latest on that coming up. Plus, the president says he will announce his Supreme Court pick this week. Ahead, who has emerged as the frontrunners for the High Court's vacant seat.
And another Fox's alert for you. Protests and demonstrations are continuing to break out at airports across the country. That after President Trump's controversial order on refugees left 12 people detained, continued at JFK Airport here in New York City. All told, 109 people, we are told, who were en route to the United States. They were in the air when that order took place. It turned out that they were denied entry to the United States last night and on Friday night. Well, since then, a federal judge has issued that emergency stay, meaning the U.S. cannot deport anyone who arrived here legally from 7 mostly Muslim nations who are on the president's travel ban. And we will have the very latest on this continuing and breaking story throughout our newscast.
And Eric, meanwhile, to help us break down President Trump's crackdown on immigration, we're going to bring in our panel now. Wendy Feliz, she's communications director for the American Immigration Council, and Dan Stein, president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. Very happy to have you both here. And I want to start with Wendy, with you. I want to start with this. How constitutionally sound is the president's immigration executive order, and do you agree with the intent?
Well, I think we're going to have to leave it up to the courts to decide the constitutionality, but we've already had 4 judges raise serious questions about it, and that's what the stay is that was just referenced earlier. So basically, the people that we've tried to ban are not going to be able to be deported, but they're supposed to be admitted into the country. I don't think, honestly, this is a policy that is going to make us safer. Whenever in human history you've banned people based on their religion, there's been terrible ramifications. We are talking about mothers and children who have gone through a significant vetting process, who have been waiting almost 2 years to get in. We're talking about individuals who helped the U.S. military in very difficult countries and have now been given refugee and asylum status in this country. We cannot keep them out. That's not fair. The American public's interested in fairness and fair solutions and not interested in closing our borders to the world or being mean to people who need safety and protection. Our country was founded by people seeking safety and protection.
Dan, how do you see it?
Listen, Donald Trump is doing what he said he was going to do. And I know it's kind of strange, but somebody actually campaigned on a series of positions, and now they're putting in a full day's work and they're getting the job done. Donald Trump says we need to be safe. Americans want to be safe. And to call this a Muslim ban basically is playing into the hands of ISIS. This is not a Muslim ban. This is a temporary suspension of immigration from a handful of countries where vetting is a problem. Vetting is about guaranteeing the public safety. This is pending a review of the vetting procedures to make sure that they're effective in protecting the American people. Donald Trump has said we're going to suspend immigration for several months pending that vetting review. Now, the Constitution provides Article I powers to Congress, and they have delegated to the president, along with his inherent commander-in-chief authority, broad powers to stop or exclude immigrants from any country on any basis he wants in the national interest for national security purposes. So this is clearly a constitutional order. It has all kinds of historical precedent. It's designed to guarantee the safety of the American people, and that there are many people and organizations in this country that simply don't understand refugee admissions, immigration admissions. This is essentially a discretionary policy of the American people. People don't have the right to come into this country without limit or unilaterally. People only have the right to come in if they are deemed in the public interest and allowed to come in.
And Dan and Wendy were showing pictures here of the dozens of protests that have erupted over the country, across the country, just yesterday. And I want to move on now to another topic with you, which is sanctuary cities. I want to ask you, Wendy, should local municipalities and law enforcement be ordered by the federal government to police unauthorized immigrants or risk federal funding if they don't comply?
Well, what sanctuary cities are basically saying is they don't want to use their local law enforcement resources to do federal immigration enforcement. We know local law enforcement is already stretched very thin. They have a big job to keep communities safe. So we need to allow them to keep communities safe, and that's why local law enforcement don't want to get mixed up to this. And federal immigration enforcement, they need to be two different things. They cannot be conflated. So that doesn't make us safer by making our local police not able to protect local communities, and it certainly doesn't make our communities safer or better by beginning to cut funding to schools and to other needs in communities. Americans don't support these kind of policies that ask us to turn our neighbors in. Americans don't support policies that isolate us.
Okay, I'm sorry. I want to get Dan in because I want to try to squeeze in one more topic. So, Dan, if you can give me your take on the sanctuary cities, and then we'll move on.
Look, these policies are a threat to public safety. Americans are dying all over the country because aliens who should have been deported are not being picked up by ICE. Because cities aren't cooperating. They're not honoring federal detainers to hold aliens who ought to be deported. And so, in the end, under the constitutional system, states have an obligation to work with the federal government cooperatively to help enforce immigration law. That doesn't mean state and local officers are immigration officers. They're not deporting aliens, but they are supposed to cooperate to hold aliens until ICE can come and pick them up. Now, what Donald Trump has said is this artificial wall, where states are providing benefits to people, no questions asked, providing an incentive for people to come illegally and immigrate. This is basically, you can never control illegal immigration unless the state and local governments work harmoniously with the federal government to cooperatively enforce immigration law. And thank goodness that's what Donald Trump is now finally trying to do.
I have to leave it there. I'm out of time. I don't have time for another topic. Dan Stein, Wendy Felice, thank you very much for your comments here on Fox News.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, some of the people who were detained at John F. Kennedy International Airport, the total was 12, or some are now being released because of the federal judge's order, and the protests are still planned for later on this afternoon. Our Brian Yennis is at JFK right now at the very latest, and there have been some news conferences there, Brian. What's the latest?
Hi, Eric. Well, the numbers have been really up in flux because, quite frankly, it's been tough for officials and congresspeople and activists and lawyers to speak to CBP and officials here at the airport to figure out who's actually detained. What we know now is that 14 people are here at JFK, or were here at JFK at some point today. 2 were released earlier this morning. An additional 4 were released in the last about hour, including a Somali student that went to Ohio State University. And the video that you're watching right now is a reuniting of an Iraqi man and his fiancée, a woman who is just 21. They plan on getting married here in the United States. She was held here at JFK. This is what the Iraqi man had to say after before the reunion.
We're not terrorists. She's not terrorist. She's a 21-year-old, most beautiful woman you could probably meet. Initially, they were bad because they handcuffed her. It's getting a little bit better now. She hasn't ate maybe in 2 days. She was crying for the last 2 days, but as of today, it's getting a little bit better.
So to be clear, there are still 7 people that are detained here at Terminal 4. An additional person is detained at Terminal 1, an Iranian national, we are told. Lawyers here have been working nonstop. About 100 lawyers have been working to represent these people and to make sure that they're getting the kind of representation that they need. The activists expect that all 14 people will be released here at JFK at some point today. Remember, the federal order, the judge made the decision late last night that said that these people that arrived here with legal visas as well as green cards and were detained at airports should not be deported. It does not mean that they can't be detained, and therein lies the confusion, and that is why lawyers are pushing for these people to be released. The lawyers also say that the big fight right now is to make sure that people at airports all around the world that have permanent green cards or legal visas are able to board flights into the United States. So again, lawyers are saying that there is still confusion for CBP. Some Border Patrol agents are using their own discretion and not releasing these people, and they are urging people to, those who are affected, to definitely contact them to make sure that they don't sign anything they're not supposed to, etc. Eric?
All right, Brian. Yeah, there still is some confusion, and there are reports also that students who attend MIT, Yale, and Stanford, for example, have been detained because they come back from Christmas vacation and haven't been able to return. All right, Brian, thank you so much.
No problem.
Well, new reaction from our neighbor to the north. What Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is saying about those refugees banned from the U.S.
Sorry, and you know, President Trump has been on the phone with several world leaders. There he is talking to Vladimir Putin yesterday. We are told they did not discuss Russian sanctions or Moscow's influence in the presidential election. Coming up, we'll analyze what that call means.
Order now, where Canada's Prime Minister is putting out the welcome mat for refugees rejected by President Trump's new ban. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau tweeting this weekend, quote, "To those fleeing persecution, terror, and war, Canadians will welcome you regardless of your faith. Diversity is our strength. Hashtag welcome to Canada." Now, Mr. Trudeau said he also plans to speak with President Trump about the success of Canada's refugee and immigration policy when he visits the White House within the next month.
President Trump beginning his second week in office with a busy day today of more phone calls with several heads of state, including the heads of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and South Korea. Meanwhile, Jordan's King Abdullah, well, he's set to arrive in Washington. State media says that he will have several meetings with administration officials and members of Congress. But the White House says it is not yet clear if the king will visit Mr. Trump at the White House. This all comes, of course, after the president had the one-on-one with Russian President Vladimir Putin yesterday in a much-anticipated call. What was the result of that? Let's talk to Susan Ferricchio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner. You know, Susan, we're told that during the Putin call, Russian sanctions did not come up. Moscow's interference with the presidential election did not come up either. Would you have expected them to touch on that, or is this mostly a, pro forma type of, official, standard, formal phone call?
Yeah, hey, Eric, I think it was considered a congratulatory call. The Trump administration said it was initiated by Putin to just congratulate the president on his election and his inauguration. But I think from Moscow's perspective, they would very much like to see these sanctions lifted, beginning with the ones imposed by the Obama administration for the interference in the pre-election campaigning. And that's certainly going to, I think, eventually come up. And Trump is kind of acted sort of ambiguous about it, like maybe he would consider it at some point, but that it was too early to talk about it. And that really puts him at odds with a lot of people on Capitol Hill, even Republicans who really don't want these sanctions lifted. In fact, Senate Armed Services Committee Chairman John McCain, a Republican, is talking about legislation to make sure that the sanctions aren't removed. So, you know, the phone call was certainly interesting, but nothing definitive came out of it other than, you know, the two getting to know each other on the telephone and raising more questions about what is this relationship going to be like between Trump and Putin.
Yeah, and also Kellyanne Conway has been quoted as saying that they are considering lifting sanctions, although, as you say, the president says that's too early. Yet in the readout from the Kremlin of the phone call, it said that they discussed better cooperation and economic ties between the United States and Russia. I mean, some could read into that explicitly means the dropping of sanctions.
Well, you know, he's a businessman, President Trump, so it doesn't surprise me that they would talk about this. But again, you're getting probably a little bit of spin from Moscow on what the call was about. It would be really hard, I think, for President Trump to lift those sanctions ultimately. I think there'd be so much pushback at this point. They're just getting to know each other. But don't forget, you know, there's been so much intrigue about what his relationship is going to be like with Putin. And also, I'd like to remind you about the Obama administration. They wanted to hit the reset button with Russia as well. Everyone has tried to work out some kind of relationship with Putin, but ultimately, you know, I think the words of Theresa May this week when she came to the U.S. and talked to Republicans was, you know, engage but beware. And I think that's what Trump is doing. And it's just too early to tell where this is going, other than the two of them talking to each other and getting the congratulations from Putin.
And you remember that George W. Bush, the president, said that he, you know, looked into his soul while he looked in Mr. Putin's eyes. Meanwhile, finally, in terms of other world leaders, Theresa May, Angela Merkel, that was a 45-minute phone call, certainly touched on NATO. But we are told that May and Merkel both, well, publicly at least, they have criticized the refugee, you know, travel ban. He's likely to get more of that today, don't you think? Because he's going to be talking to the King of Saudi Arabia and other Middle East leaders.
Especially, exactly, because this morning his chief of staff, Reince Priebus, said, well, maybe we need to expand this to other countries, including Saudi Arabia. You know, I kind of doubt that's going to happen. I think, if anything, there's going to be some more pushback and some changes in this immigration executive order. But certainly that's going to be part of the call, I would expect. Saudi Arabia is a key U.S. ally in the Middle East and will continue to be so. We handle them very carefully. And again, you know, Trump has business interests there. That's not supposed to influence anything he does, but he's a businessman and he thinks that way. He tends to make these calls very personal. And I expect that's going to be a part of the call, just talking about, you know, forging strong connections with Saudi Arabia.
That call later on this afternoon. Of course, we'll be covering it all through the rest of the afternoon here on the Fox News channel. And we'll report on certainly whether or not the refugee ban comes up. And Susan certainly probably will. Susan, good to see you. Thank you as always. Of course. Arthel.
Okay, Susan and Eric, President Trump saying he plans to announce his selection for Supreme Court nominee this week. The two federal appeals court judges who are now said to be on the short list. Years since the death of Justice Antonin Scalia, federal appeals court judges Neil Gorsuch and Thomas Hardiman emerging as the top contenders. Lauren Blanchard is live from Washington with more in this story. Lauren?
Hi, Arthel. While the potential list of nominees may be down to 2 names, if anything this administration has shown us over the campaign and the first week in office, it's that we can't be totally sure who President Trump will choose until he announces on Thursday. But here's who we're watching. Judges Neil Gorsuch and Thomas Hardiman. The seat has been open since Justice Antonin Scalia died nearly a year ago. President Trump told Fox that he would want Senator Mitch McConnell to use the nuclear option and change the rules to allow for a simple majority vote in the Senate if Democrats try to stall his pick.
We're going to treat this nominee fairly, but we need to know who he or she is, what they stand for, and believe that they're in the mainstream of thinking when it comes to American political thought.
Meanwhile, just over a week into President Trump's administration, only 3 of his cabinet-level members have been confirmed and sworn in, something the Trump administration is blaming on Democrats dragging their feet.
We've been urging the Senate, urging the Democrats to not be obstructionists, to do what's best in the interest of this country, which is to confirm the people who are needed to run this government and make sure that we are moving forward together as a united nation to make this country better and stronger.
A busy day is expected Tuesday. Senate committees planning to vote on at least 5 cabinet-level members. If they pass committee votes, then they'll move on to a full Senate vote. And that's what Rex Tillerson, the Secretary of State nominee, is waiting for. His full Senate vote is expected this week after he narrowly cleared the Senate Foreign Relations Committee